people and not just for a few.
All right, a lot to anticipate even as the World Economic Forum kicks off in Switzerland. I mean, they'll be talking about issues centered on improving global cooperation, embracing the digital revolution and tackling climate change. But just to put matters into perspective, I'm joined in studio by Wangari Mwikia, who's an economic and financial analyst. Welcome to Bottom Line Africa.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's just break down the World Economic Forum. We well know that there will be notable individuals who are missing. Talk about President Donald Trump. We take a look at UK Prime Minister Theresa May, as well as the French President Emmanuel Macron and Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. Considering that this is a forum where world leaders as well as business leaders meet, how notable will these individuals missing be in this particular year's World Economic Forum?
I think it's going to be very well felt, if I may say, because the whole point of this forum, the World Economic Forum, is to discuss the issues around globalization, around world trade, and these are the specific issues that the President of the US, Donald Trump, and the President of China and all the big westernized states are actually grappling with right now. And these are the primary reasons they are not attending the forum, because they're having these discussions amongst themselves. So their presence will be, their absence will be felt, because what they decided actually has a huge impact on the direction of the world economy, as it were.
Well, that's very true. You mentioned that they're facing their own problems. Let's take a look at what actually they're facing. We have the escalation of the US-China trade war, uncertainty over Brexit. We well know what's happening in Britain, volatility of financial markets, as well as a US partial government shutdown. Now, this, in terms of what the WEF is meant to achieve this year, in terms of, embracing the digital revolution and also tackling climate change, might this be an impediment of some sorts when we put into perspective that these are some of the big countries in terms of contributing to the global growth of the economy of the world?
I think when you think about the issues that they're having with each other, you think of the US and China. They're having a big trade spat and imposing tariffs on each other. Now, in terms of globalization, when you look at what the WEF stands for, globalization is more about integration. It's more about how we can trade with each other, how we can share resources amongst each other, how we can open borders. But when you look at what's happening in the US, they're looking towards, building walls, rejiggering the international trade agreements that they have worldwide. So I think that it's taking a step back, whereas that's juxtaposed against what the WEF is doing, where we're trying to take a step forward and see how, in an integrated world, we can benefit from each other.
Positives and negatives of globalization.
Yes.
Let's take a keen look on it. You've mentioned the US and what they're doing. We well know of what's happening in Britain in terms of the Brexit as well. What positives might actually be brought to the table when globalization is achieved, if it will be?
Globalization allows resources to flow from countries that have specific resources to other countries that could use those resources. So if you look at the case of in Africa, we're resource rich. Everybody knows this. We have not been able to tap into the revenue potential of our resources, whereas the Western countries have been able to tap into these. So take, for example, if we look at chocolate. Cocoa is grown in Africa, mostly in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. But when you look at the revenues that are earned from chocolate, in cocoa and chocolate, it's about 5.7 billion within Africa, within Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. But when you look at the US, they gain about one company, Hershey's company, which is a chocolate, internationally renowned chocolate company, makes 7.4 billion. So one company juxtaposed to two countries. How is that going to, how are we benefiting as Africans and the people with the raw materials from this globalized economy? So I think what we should be thinking about when we're going into these discussions in the World Economic Forum is how we can take advantage of what developments are happening in the Western world, globally. And this is to do with, for example, AI. We're looking at the Internet of Things. We're looking at robotics. How can we leapfrog, as it were, from where we are now, taking advantage of the advances in technology and do what M-Pesa did, essentially, and pick up from where we are now instead of trying to go through the whole process of industrialization and through the whole manufacturing, etc., and just leapfrog and be in the globalized world.
All right, that's very interesting. You've mentioned one of the issues that they will be discussing about. That's the emergence of digital revolution in the world right now. Now, the emergence of the tech sector, we've named companies like Uber, take a look at Airbnb. They don't have physical structures that they operate as well in terms of businesses, but they're there and they're contributing to the growth of countries, in terms of GDP. As tech executives float their cases to business leaders who are actually in Switzerland right now, how can they front their case to ensure that they defy the recent market jitters and ensure that these individuals actually invest in these companies in terms of initial public offerings that are meant to happen this year?
Well, it's all about disruptive technology, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the structures that exist in the world today that are, for example, the unions, if you're talking about Uber, taxi unions, if we're talking about A&B, the hotel unions, and the structures that they've built over many, many years to ensure that they're revenue generating and sustainable in the way that they've known how to do business. But here come Airbnb, here come Uber, and they're completely disrupting the market. But is that a bad thing? My take is that, of course, there's going to be growing pains. Of course, there's going to be disruptions in traditional industries. But Uber and Airbnb and these non-traditional sectors, tech companies, are here to stay, in my view. And if we're going to go into the digitization world, which is in the new industrial revolution, as the WF is calling it, we have to embrace them. We have to create structures and policy that will enable us to transition to these new economies while maybe tempering the blow on the old economies, but realizing that, like coal, we need to move on. We're now on solar, we're now on wind energy, we're doing other things. So some industries die, some take their place.
It's disruptive, as simple as that. As we still continue, the global growth is potentially slowing down in 2019 as compared to last year, where the World Economic Forum actually happened in the wake of renewed economic growth in various countries, including the United States. Now, Africa is emerging as a regional strong continent in terms of economic growth. Now, African leaders, African business leaders who are actually attending the World Economic Forum might actually need to sensitize a little bit more on the potential that Africa has, even as China, in terms of its GDP, it's going down, even whatever is happening in the US and Britain as well. What should be the first thing for African leaders and business leaders as well as they have a sit down with the European and the American counterparts in terms of making sure Africa is well represented in this 2019 economic year?
The first thing I would say is not to go cap in hand. Every time we are going to these forums, we're looking for money, we're trying to ask for aid, and that is a story that we are tired of. The whole world is tired. Africans are tired of it. The development partners are tired of it.
Yeah.
We're asking ourselves, what can Africa do for itself? With all the aid that has come into our continent, what can we show for it? And I would contend that we have a lot to show for it. Look at the entrepreneurship sector, the entrepreneurs on the continent. They're coming up with different ideas of and different ways of trying to deal with the context within which we live. Like I said earlier, we are a continent that's blessed with raw materials. How can we use that to leverage ourselves in the globalized economy? How can we, for example, if you look at DRC is one of the biggest producers of cobalt, which is used for mobile phone technologies and will be used for autonomous vehicles, like Tesla, whatever, these companies are making. Why isn't DRC positioning itself with the digitization industrial revolution 4.0 and investing in these autonomous vehicles? Instead of only providing the raw materials, how can they leapfrog, again I use that word, into the more productive elements of their value chain in order to sit at the main table with the players instead of being the one who's cap in hand, yet we hold all the raw materials. So I would say what we can do is that we can try to leverage what we have. We can create strong policies, because if we go to these forums without any policies or structures in place, we run the risk of people taking advantage of the situation that we're in, and that's actually the context of within which we live in Africa today.
Something else that might also affect African countries, I was taking a look at the IMF latest Economic Forum report, where they focused actually that the no-deal Brexit turnout, if it happens, might actually wipe 5 to 8 points of the British GDP in the long run, and the current political uncertainty is definitely not helping. Now, for Commonwealth countries, of which Kenya is also a member, and we trade with Britain as well as the European Union, what should we have in mind as we are represented in the World Economic Forum in case of a no-deal scenario?
That we need to diversify. We are part of the Commonwealth, which gives us a slight advantage when it comes to trade within the Commonwealth countries. But it's no secret that we don't benefit as much as Great Britain does from the other Commonwealth countries, and some major Commonwealth countries such as Australia. We are always the underdog. So when we go to these forums, we should be exploring what our trade relations and what our other foreign relations are with with Great Britain, and figure out how we can diversify our portfolio, diversify our trade relations, invest in other countries, and create other strong relationships with other countries in order to sell our goods, in order to boost our economy. One of the things that Kenya is thinking of doing is going into deeper talks and forging stronger relationships with India. So this is kind of the South-South cooperation that I think we're going to be seeing more of as we progress, as we go forward.
Okay. Yeah. Well, many thanks, Wangari Mwikia, financial analyst right there, breaking down